Hi, my name is Sue Harvey. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a member at Hillfields Church. And I just really want to share with you a little bit about how I came to know the Lord. I grew up in Grace Road in Downend, and I went to a Church of England school. I used to sing in that church back then, but I grew up knowing about Jesus, but I never really had a relationship with him. I didn't realise how much he loved me and he wanted to have a relationship with me. So I met Larry when I was 16. To be honest, Larry was a little bit of a sort of out of control kid. He was different, very different to the strict sort of upbringing that I had. But I liked the craziness and the excitement, and he was different, all right. He had this sort of gentleness as well that I knew was genuine. To be honest though, he was a sort of lad that fathers would keep their daughters away from, but so yeah, that's funny. But he made me laugh, and he had a soft side to him, as I say. So we got together when I was 16. We were courting for quite a while, and then we moved into Larry's brother George's house, George and Pauline, who come to this church as well, for a short while. And from there we moved next door to Larry's parents' house down in what is now Light Green. Sorry, I'm checking my notes, so much to go through. They had a bungalow and acres of land, and we moved next door. And to start off with, it was a touring caravan. So we lived there for a little while, and I was already pregnant by now, and we were expecting our first child. Joanne was born in 1980, and we were really, really excited to have our first child. And when she was born, we were obviously over the moon. She wasn't without her health problems. She was born with a cleft palate, which is like a split in the soft palate of your mouth. And she had club feet. So she had various difficulties, but we battled through those, and we went on to have 4 more beautiful children: our son Larry, our daughter Sam, and then we had twins, Billy Joe and Georgie Lee. And although we had a lovely family and we had plenty of money, we weren't really fulfilled or as happy as I think we could have been. There was always that piece that was missing. We were earning lots of money, some by legal gains, some actually by illegal gains. But as I say, there was something missing, and we still weren't happy. At that time, in those days back then, there used to be a travelling minister to gypsy people, because my husband is a gypsy. He used to come around all the different sites and talk to us. And he came to us quite regular. And we used to love listening to the stories, and he'd tell us about Jesus. And we gave our lives to Jesus back then. But we never did anything about it. We still carried on with our life, and Larry would go out and drink and what have you, and we were never truly happy. When John was about 16, she had severe back pain and leg pain, and we took her to the hospital, and they told us that she had slipped discs and she needed an operation. So that was booked, and we went to Southmead for that operation, where they plated and put screws in her spine, and she had to wear this brace around her midriff and to keep her back straight. And the time in hospital, pushing herself up and down the bed, had caused open sores on her elbows, which never seemed to heal, which was strange. We couldn't understand why they didn't heal. And even when she came out of hospital, she came out in a brace around her waist, but she had these bandages around her arms. So we went through her 18th birthday, and she was still having her elbows dressed, and these sores were just got worse and worse and was oozing pus, basically. So anyway, we were due to go and see in the January another consultant plastic surgeon who was to perform an operation on her elbows to close them up. So anyway, this morning we took Joanne to the hospital. I took her. It was a simple plan. It was for me to take her over to the hospital, see the consultant and find out a date of when she was going in. So we went and saw the consultant, and the consultant said, you know, I can't do it at the moment. It's going to be a good few weeks down the road, but I'll ring you when we've got a space and we'll get her in and we'll put it right. Well, at this time, we left the consultant's room and we went down to the WRVS coffee shop for a coffee. Joanne and I walked in, and there was this chap sat there with one eye closed down, and we could see he'd been in some sort of accident because of the scars across his forehead. And as we came in, he said, welcome, and we said, thank you. And he came over to us and he said, I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to pray with you. Would that be okay? And I thought, a little bit strange, but yeah, okay. So we allowed him to pray. And he prayed for us and prayed that we would get a date soon for the operation, and that God would handle the operation, and that all would be fine, basically. And we thanked him. We left the coffee shop that day and we went home. Now, strangely enough, the next day, we got a phone call from the consultant, and the consultant said, I've got room for you tomorrow if you want to come in. I can do the operation. I've had a cancellation. Come in. So again, another simple plan. My husband was to look after the twins, who were only 18 months old at the time, and I was going to take Joanne over, get her settled, have her operation. Hopefully everything would be okay. At this time, for the last sort of few months beforehand, Joanne had been having difficulty sleeping. And we thought this was the reason that she was falling asleep in front of us in the daytime. We'd be talking to her and she'd just nod off. But we told the consultant about all this, and he didn't seem too concerned. He thought maybe it was down to stress. But anyway, that morning we took her in, and she was given a pre-med because she was so anxious. And within seconds of having this pre-med, Joanne, I noticed, had this glazed look in her eyes, and I thought, my goodness, she's stopped breathing. At the same time, there was a nurse sat next to me. She was talking me through the operation, and I looked at Joanne and I said to the nurse, she stopped breathing. She's not breathing. Please look at her, she's not breathing. And the nurse said, no, she's fine. Anyway, on looking closer, the nurse looked and she hit some red button on the wall. And that was it. It was chaos. The nurses, doctors came running from all over the place. They pulled the curtains round. I was ushered over to some desk, reception desk, crying my eyes out. And they took Joanne away. I phoned Larry. I can't remember what I said now. I was crying and saying, Joanne, stop breathing. And the next thing we knew, the whole family was at the hospital, and they'd taken Joanne into intensive care. She had indeed stopped breathing, and her heart was ready to stop as well. So at that point, we went into intensive care to see her. Joanne was all hooked up to breathing apparatus on a life support machine. So she couldn't obviously talk to us. She was awake. And they were waiting for a consultant to see Joanne. The consultant that was chosen was a man by the name of Kieran Bolger. When we eventually got to speak to him, we asked him what they were looking for, and they said they thought it might have been a tumour, a brain tumour. And they took scans and did their various tests, and when the news came back, it wasn't at all what we thought it was. He told us that Joanne's cervical spine, which is the top of your neck, the C1 bone, the odontoid peg, had not grown straight. It had grown into her brain stem and was causing her to stop breathing. And we said, well, can you operate? Is there anything you can do? And he said, it's going to be very difficult. I've spoken to a colleague of mine who's here in the hospital, a Dr. Crockard from London, who advised me to just leave her because he said, you'll kill her if you remove this bone. But he said, I've just come back with a new way of surgery from America, and it's called stealth surgery, where they do all the surgery by computer, and so that they don't hit any major nerves or arteries or anything. He said, and I'd like to try and do this operation. And he explained to us we would need to fracture across here, drop her jaw down and drill through the back of her throat to remove this bone. Then I would insert a new device that would allow her in place to move her head again, and so on and so forth. It does carry a high risk. At the moment, I could only give you as much as a 50-50 chance of survival, maybe even less. And we said, is this something you do on your own child? And he said, yes, I would. So we said, right, okay, you carry on. We gave him permission to carry on. Joanne couldn't speak for herself. She was on a life support machine. So in the meantime, because I used to stay in the intensive care with her, I'd sit next to her bed, and all the tests, everything she had, I was there with her, holding her hand. I wouldn't leave her. And the rest of the family were looking after our children at home. In the meantime, Larry walked up to the chapel, the little chapel there at the top of the corridor at Frenchay. And he got down on his hands and knees before the altar in the chapel. And he said, Lord, I don't know if you're real, but if you are, I really need you. I really, really need you now in my life. Take me instead. Let my daughter live. Take me. But please help us. And Larry describes the feeling of like a warm cloak growing around his shoulders. He said, and he knew beyond every doubt that Joanne would be okay. Anyway, he came back into the intensive care and he said, Sue, Joanne's going to be okay. And I said, how do you know, Lar? How do you know? He said, I've just spoken to God in the chapel and I know. Well, I have to say, I thought, this is stress, he's going nuts. And the rest of his family were out waiting in the waiting room, hundreds of them. They all thought the same. But he kept saying it, and he got her coat out of the cupboard and he put it around the chair and he said, there's her coat, she's coming out in that. God's told me everything's going to be fine. So as I said, the operation was set for a week later. The consultant said it would take around about 8 hours, and on that morning I was in such a state because I hadn't eaten, I'd hardly drank, I was so weak. Larry said, come on, we're going down to the church of Pip and Jay, where we knew this travelling minister from years ago, Cliff Kelly, we knew that he went there. He said, I'm going to go down and ask for prayer. Come on, you're coming. So me and Larry and my son, we went down there. They had to lift me into the car. I was so weak. I'd lost a good few stone by then. And I'm saying all the way down, I don't understand why we're doing it. Why are we doing this, Lara? Why? He said, because she's going to be all right. I know. And I said, how do you know? As we pulled into the gates of Pip and Jay, I said, how do you know that she's going to be all right? He said, I'll tell you how I know. Because God's told me. And I'll tell you, God's just told me that the man that's going to answer that door, his name's going to be John. That's how sure I am. Anyway, we knocked on the door and a man came to the door, opened the door, and Larry explained to him what was happening with Joanne. He said, we've come for prayer. And he said, come in, my name's John. Well, me and my son looked at each other and we were baffled. But we went in and we had prayer for Joanne. And we thanked him and we went back. We were waiting hours and hours for Joanne to come out. 15 hours later, Joanne came out at near enough midnight. And the surgeon came out so tired, he said, I've had to stop, I can't go on any further, but we'll need to bring her back in. I've taken the bone out and her head was locked in a frame. The next few hours will count. She's had an awful lot of anaesthetic. If she can get through the next few hours, we'll take her back down. So that was on the Monday. That was midnight, running into Tuesday morning. They had to take her back down again Wednesday morning. Wednesday morning came, he thought putting the necessary equipment in that he needed to put in would take about 5 to 6 hours and she would be sorted. 15 hours later, again, he emerged and said it was so difficult. She had crumbling of the neck bones. There were so many problems we encountered. I've had to fuse her neck completely. We said, what does that mean? And he said, well, she's not going to be able to move her head or her neck again, but, you know, she'll be okay. So we took her back to intensive care and we sat with her while she recovered. She went from intensive care to high dependency and from there to Ward 5, which was a neurosurgery ward. And she did immensely well. She was so brave in those days. One particular day I remember going over to the canteen and I said to Larry, that's that guy, that's the guy that prayed for me. Over there, his name's Steve. And Larry walked to him and he said, I just wanted to come and thank you for praying for my daughter that day. He said, I remember you. He said, how is she? And we told him what happened. And he said, I go to the church called the Sanctuary at Staple Hill. I'll get them to pray. We're on it. Don't worry. Which was lovely. And as I say, she went on and she did so well. We got to Ward 5 and the nurses in there were just amazing, absolutely amazing. But one day we came in to visit her because by then we were just going home on an evening for a couple of hours and then we'd come back in with Joanne. And Larry noticed this woman 2 beds up from Joanne that was sat reading her Bible. And all this time Larry had continued to go up to the chapel and write in the book and thanking God for what he was doing. And I was going up with him and the family were going up with him and we would say our prayers. Anyway, he saw this lady and he said, are you a Christian? She said, yes. And he proceeded to tell her what had happened to our daughter, to Joanne. And she said, oh my goodness. You were the man that came down that morning and knocked on the door at Pip and Jay. He said, yes. How do you know that? She said, because I was coming down the stairs to answer the door that morning. And I came over ill and I sat on the steps and John had already passed me. And John went down to answer the door and I know John prayed for you. Well, we were just baffled, astounded by it all. And you see, that's where I want to say God is in every single detail right along the way. He provided Steve at the beginning to pray for us. And there are so many other people he provided, too many to count. But God knew what he was doing and how he was going to bring us through. We eventually started going up to the Sanctuary Church because we knew Steve had asked us to come up. And we went to a few of the coffee mornings up there and he said to Larry, why don't you sacrifice something one morning? Come to church. And Larry said to me, sacrifice, what does that mean? Give up something. I said, yeah. He said, well, Sunday evening there's a service. I usually go out and have a drink, but yeah, maybe instead we'll go to church. And we did. And that evening, when the pastor Darren said, is there anybody that would like to come and give their lives to Jesus, we found ourselves walking forward to the front. And it was at that point that we gave our lives fully to Jesus. And that was all part of our journey. There are so many people that go through these situations where they're in pain or they have a child that's ill and in hospital. You know, you don't have to come that way to the Lord. We did. We had to. But God brought us through all the same. But you don't have to come that way. You can come to know the Lord right now by just going somewhere quiet and talking to him and saying, Lord, you know, I need you in my life, and asking Jesus to be your personal Lord and Saviour. And I guarantee you, I promise you, in fact, that your life will change.